Cuse Countdown here in the Carrier Dome at the 2013 Syracuse Lacrosse Media Day. I'm Heather Prusak alongside my analysts Ben Fontana and Gabe Altieri. It's hard to believe there's already another lacrosse season starting.
It's crazy. I mean, it's January. It's freezing cold outside, but hey.
I'm sure this team's looking to forget last season too, so ready for a fresh start.
And starting off with last season, a couple quick hits to start off with. Kind of a disappointing season. The team went 9-8, barely made the NCAA tournament, but then pulled out a big win in the Big East tournament. So what's your biggest takeaway from last year?
Well, I mean, 7-7 in the regular season isn't really Syracuse lacrosse. You talk about all these undefeated teams, back-to-back national championships in 08 and 09. So, I mean, this team really has a lot to prove this season, coming off a 500 regular season.
I mean, for me, it's got to be how good that class actually was that left Syracuse. 2 national championships, and we all talked about how great it was, but I don't think we really appreciated just how many great players were on that team and how rare it is for a group like that to come around.
And speaking of one of those great players, a returning player this year, Brian Megill, he took some face-offs last year, something that we haven't seen yet. We saw it last year a lot, though. So do you guys see that happening if the team struggles with the face-off X?
He said he'll be ready for it when I asked him today, but what he said in the first couple days of practice here in January already, that he hasn't been taking them, and he's happy about that because they have guys like Chris Daddio, a guy coming in, Brett Conroy, one of the freshman guys coming in who are ready to take face-offs. So yes, he'll come in if they need him, but I don't think they really will.
Yeah, I don't think they really will either. And it really depends not so much on who's taking the faceoffs, but who's picking up those ground balls. Who's the guy that's after the ball is loose? Who's picking it up? That was the big problem last year, not necessarily who was taking it.
And another spot on the field that was kind of a question mark at the beginning of last season, the goalie situation. They had 7 different guys who could have been their starter, but it seemed like Bobby Wardwell kind of took that starting role last year.
Yeah, and this year he's confident. He's loose. Last year he was, very reserved in himself with Matt Lehrman and Dominic Lamolinera getting reps, but Bobby Wardwell is confident that he can win the starting goalie job this year. It's kind of up in the air. It's kind of open, but he's the guy that should get it.
Well, you start off right with that Princeton game last year against a very good Princeton team. He came up strong, and he showed this whole team he can do this. He can play as a freshman, and now he's at a year under his belt. I expect big things from Bobby Wardwell this year.
Well, now moving from last season to this 2013 squad, it's time to meet some of the Syracuse players that are going to be returning and some new faces. Starting with the attack, you got a guy like Derek Maltz leading the attack. He's a captain this year. What do you see from that unit?
Well, the fact that he's a captain only as a junior says a lot. I think, it's voted by his teammates. So his teammates say that, hey, this guy's going to be our leader, led the team in goals last year. He's a guy that can really create shots. He gets tricky sometimes with those underhand scoops, but when he's around the crease, I think he's a real animal, and I think it's going to translate into this year too. With 2 years left, this guy's got a lot to prove. I think he wants to be first-team All-Biggie. He wants to be an All-American, and he can get it done.
Now, Gabe, moving over to the midfield, you have that famous 22 number, Jojo DeMarasco. It's his last year wearing it. How do you see the midfield kind of emerging this year?
Well, the biggest thing with Jojo has always been the fact that he's just been double-teamed every time he gets on the field. He's seen as the biggest threat. I mean, that Coach Desko said it today. He seemed like he's always the guy that other teams are focusing on. So it depends how they use him. It depends on whether he's the one getting the ball or he's the one kind of dishing. He's got to kind of see what the defense gives him, like Coach Desko says, and go from there and try to maybe set some other guys off, maybe some of those guys in the attack.
Now moving over to the defense, you have a captain there, a second-year captain, Brian Megill, leading that defense, wearing number 11. He wants to make it kind of the 22 of the defense that we've heard. So now, how do you see a guy like Brian Megill taking this defense and really having them be that championship team?
Well, I think he's a guy who can put him to the next level because of his leadership. Joe Fazio, Henry Schoonmaker, Brandon Mullen. There's a lot of young guys and older guys like Fazio who are really ready to take this defense to where it was with Joel White, Tom Guadagnolo. So this year, as a returning player, a senior second year, and even as a preseason All-American again, when people talk about Syracuse, talk about Brian Megill, and he's really a guy who can get it done. His ride's great. He's got great communication. He's vocal out there, so he can get a lot done for this defense.
And Gabe, now going over to the goalie situation, we talked a little bit about it earlier last year, but now Bobby Wardwell seems like he's going to be that starter this year. How do you see that kind of competition, even still with Dom Lamolinera in there?
Well, yeah, that's what Coach talked about. He talked about Lamolinera looking good so far, looking like he could compete out there, and that, I think, is great for Bobby Wardwell. He can't feel complacent being in there at that goalie position. He knows that there's a guy right behind him that's ready to take that spot from him.
Now, really quick, let's talk. What are your X factors for the entire season? What do you see happening this year?
Well, there's one guy who I really want to focus in on. That's Nicky Galasso. He's a transfer from North Carolina. Last year was limited with the Tar Heels, just because of the fact that he had a broken foot. Now this year, he said he's perfect, he's ready to go, he's back, he's all fired up. So him, Maltz, a 1-2, a punch at the attack, it could be dangerous. So Nicky Galasso is a junior transfer, got to keep your eye out for.
Well, for me, it's got to be ground balls, and I think a big thing with this team last year was they didn't look like they were trying a lot out there. A lot of times the other teams were dominating the game, especially aggressively. Outside of Kevin Drew, he was the one that was always getting those ground balls, always being the one to step up big for loose balls in areas, and I think that's going to be a big key. They got to get those loose balls and try to have some success and get things going.
One area that the Orange does need to improve on from last season. Now, really quick, guys, what are your predictions for the entire season? How do you see the Orange kind of either improving or not so much from last season?
Well, I actually think they're going to turn around. I'm always the optimist. 14-game regular season. I see Syracuse going 12-2. I know it's a big jump from 7-7 last year, but they got a lot of big games at home this year. University of Virginia, Cornell, Notre Dame down at MetLife Stadium, where they're going to have a big Orange showing. So I think this team can really turn it around and only have 2 losses this season, in my eyes.
I'm going to go with 10-4, and it's mostly because of all these guys that are on this team. They all went through that season last year, that 9-8 season. They're ready. They won the Big East. They're ready to experience something more and take that next step.
Well, you can catch all of the coverage from every single game at sportsblog.citrustv.net. Be sure to keep it here for all of your Syracuse lacrosse coverage. For Ben Fontana and Gabe Altieri, I'm Heather Prusak. Thanks for watching.